Good afternoon and welcome back to WPFW. And WPFW today is doing an entire day of LGBTQ plus programming because this is Pride Month. We're doing this also. This is the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riot. And today and right now we are meeting with a young man from the, help me say this again?
Goethe-Institut.
Absolutely. And Mr. Joyner, can you tell me a little bit about you and tell me about what is this institute? And we talked briefly about some of the research you've been doing about Germany and all of that.
Yeah, of course. So we are the German Cultural Center in and outside of Germany. So there are Goethe-Institute in Germany, but also, of course, all around the world. And abroad, our mission is to foster cultural exchange between Germany and the host country or city that a Goethe Institute is in. So in this case, of course, Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And we're also a language school, so we offer German language courses. Mm-hmm. But this summer, because it's 50 years since Stonewall, we mm-hmm. thought we would take a look at where we've come in terms of Germany and North America, so also Canada and Mexico, and what sort of exchanges we've had between Germany and North America in mm-hmm. the years since Stonewall, and also especially when it comes to Germany in the years before Stonewall, so sort of between the 20s and 1969. How was that instrumental in sort of building an identity for the German queer rights movement and how they informed each other. So that's what our programming this summer really focuses on, Queer as German Folk, 50 mm-hmm. years of Transatlantic rainbow friendship. We say Transatlantic to emphasize that it's North America, not just United States.
Right.
So we've had some, we have an exhibition downstairs, and we also have had a film series, and we also have done a few other kind of just wild card events that have been real fun. So
tell us about the exhibit downstairs. And also, is this exhibit open to the public?
It is, yeah. We have the exhibit downstairs at 1990K. We are Suite 03. So you've got to go around to 20th Street and get in. But we have that open, and that's the main area where our exhibit is. And then the DC Center for the LGBT community over by U Street. I'm sorry, I don't know their exact address right off the top of my head, but we have a few pieces from from our exhibition there as well, because they are one of our biggest partners here in DC on this project. So it's sort of a dual location exhibition.
So how long is this exhibit going to be active?
Until August 27th. So we had a really good opening on the 23rd of May, and it's going to run pretty much all summer. So
what are some of the things that we would see at this exhibit?
So we kind of dive back into where the queer rights movement began in Germany, and that actually would have been in the 1910s, 1920s. We had a lot of social reform demanded in the Weimar Republic. So after the First World War, the Weimar Republic was established, which was technically the first democracy in Germany. Mm-hmm. And a lot of rules against homosexuality were lax. And so as a result, you had a lot of people who came forward and were pushing for this one particular law, paragraph 175, to be abolished, which was forbidding homosexual acts between men. And then you had a...
Did it not address, like, lesbian or...
It didn't,
transgender?
Yeah. In general, those were seen to be just mental illnesses, really. And they more or less flew under the radar. The real target of the government at that time was gay men. Because of sodomy laws. And so that was really what they were focusing on.
It's interesting. There's actually a remarkable correlation. Earlier this morning, we had the Smithsonian Institute here talking about U.S. history, and it was essentially around that same time, although we weren't quite as progressive in trying to abolish, but it was the same thing. All of the laws here in the U.S. that existed were sort of sodomy-based, male penetration, right. Whereas, lesbian and other acts were just kind of ignored.
Unnoticed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times people say, oh, well, lesbians had it good. Trans people, they had it okay, at that time because there weren't laws that explicitly banned what they did. But I think it's more just that people did not see them as a threat because how could a woman with another woman be a threat? Until
right, the fairer sex couldn't possibly have been anything, let alone have a vote, have a voice, or be a threat.
Yeah, so it was more an insult almost, like that they didn't see lesbians as the same threat that they saw gay men to their society. I mean, if that makes sense, not in a sense that like. That
statistically
a
smaller percentage, but also it's just a woman.
Yeah. Like how much damage can she possibly do? And so it was more that than just like, oh, we're okay with lesbians. Like totally we're not.
But is that piggybacked on top of sexism as well?
Oh yeah.
Because now you're dealing with sexism and combining it with some form of homophobia.
Yeah, definitely.
So and of course. There's even within our culture still the whole thought of, lesbians and gay men and transgender. It seems like gay men seem to have more privilege and more visibility and more recognition. And how does that differ in like Germany, or how did it differ?
I would say that, well, before the rise of the Nazis in the 30s, there was sort of almost a suspension of gender and sexuality, especially in big cities like Berlin.
What does that mean exactly?
It's almost like the rules, it was like anything goes. Like the rules were almost kind of didn't apply. You had women dressing up in tuxedos when they would go out. You had men in dresses. It was the lines between sexuality and gender were blurred very much, and nobody had a lot of. I mean, right now I would say there's very much a lot of emphasis put on like what you identify as and who you consider yourself to be. And
right.
I think back then
the labeling, labeling didn't exist back then nearly as much. Yeah,
you were just
not that I was alive back then. I just want to be very clear about that.
Yeah, I mean it was I was, but it was very.
You hold up really well for your age.
Oh my gosh! Whatever you're doing, I'm going to do it next.
Yeah,
so. It's a German cream,
coconut oil. Yeah, and they definitely had a. I would say there was a sense that just because you dressed or like, for instance, drag queen meant a lot more than it does now. It could apply to a lot.
How so?
A broader spectrum.
Yeah, like it could apply to cross-dressers, or it could apply to trans people. Because nobody was necessarily thinking of what is a trans person until you had this guy Magnus Hirschfeld come along, and he was a sexologist, so he was sort of almost like the
Kinsey.
He was like the predecessor to Kinsey, and.
So post-Freud, but pre-Kinsey.
Yeah. Exactly, like right smack in between those two. And he started to argue that homosexuality was not it was not an anomaly that you were born with. It was something that just was a variation on the human brain and humanity in general. And he also argued that about trans people,
right.
That it was just a variation of humanity. And
so was that a benefit for the LGBTQ movement or a hindrance?
I would say that he definitely, I mean, if you look into a little like more specific, like the verbiage that he used when he wrote about these things, it definitely, he still had some old school views. Like he still was interested in, for instance, treating homosexuality or treating trans identities as opposed to encouraging that. I mean, he still had some interest.
Solving it, right?
Yeah, like figuring out what to do about it, as opposed to just letting it be.
Yeah.
But he also, he really was one of the first major people to sort of push for the idea that it was not a choice, it was not a something that you were inclined toward because you were ill. It was something that just happened as a result of your birth, or maybe even how you were shaped as a child.
Whatever will be, will be.
Yeah.
So explain the transition from that point in time and the steps and where is it now? Yeah.
So basically, Hirschfeld, like many people, like him and sort of in his community, he had to flee the country.
Because of this.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what year. I mean, it was very close to the like around 1933, which was when Hitler was elected and the Third Reich officially began. But he had to flee Germany, and he settled in France, and then I think he went to Switzerland for a little bit. And his Institute for Sexual Research was completely destroyed. A lot of his research, he would have countless people come in there, and he would have case files on all of them, and he would have a lot of information about them, and he would basically just, his writings were just, a lot of them were destroyed. He made a film, Anders aus die anderen, or Different from the Others, which was from 1919.
Wow.
So actually the actor from Casablanca, Conrad Veidt, he played kind of the mean Nazi.
The main Nazi.
And he actually was a very anti-Nazi guy, but he was always typecast as a Nazi when he moved to Hollywood.
It might be why he was anti-Nazi at that point.
Yeah, he was probably like, oh God, again. And he actually, very young, in 1919, he played the main character of a film that Magnus Hirschfeld wrote, which was basically his sort of...
What's the name of the film?
Different from the Others in English.
Different from the Others.
From 1919, so it's 100 years old.
Wow.
And
have you seen this movie?
Yeah. 50 minutes of it are left. The majority of, or about half of the film has been destroyed. But they couldn't destroy all of it. So what they show now is a fragment, and then they'll have an intertitle that'll cover like 20 minutes of what's just gone. It'll be like Paul's sister comes to visit, and Paul's sister is played by like Anita Berber, who was like a major German star. And she just isn't in the film because everything that involved her is gone. But the film is, we screened the film as part of our film series back in May, and it was just incredible to see it on a big screen because it's such an old movie, and it's a silent movie, of course.
Remarkable piece of history.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And isn't that really? I mean, when you think about what what the Third Reich did with all of this, I mean, their goal was, some of that data was probably used for some of their own experiments and quote unquote research, but also then to to sort of recreate German history, which was part of what the Nazi objective was, correct?
Yeah, I mean, one big thing that they did was when they raided his building, because he bought 2 houses in the western area of Berlin, which was quite wealthy and sort of in like Charlottenburg, like kind of a what am I saying? Like sort of like houses as opposed to like apartment buildings. It's sort of near a nice forest area, and so he had like kind of a retreat sort of area for people who were patients of his to come, and they took advantage of this raid to get the case files of his patients, and so they knew exactly who he was treating and who was in Berlin. And they knew who to come after, and so that was one way that they used that raid to sort of access the people who were really keeping their identities confidential. It was just between him and them, and so that was one way that they could definitely sort of go
track down others. Yeah.
And then the complete destruction of it was just it sort of erased almost all of that progress. They basically said, yeah, we're back to where we started. Like, homosexuality is an illness. It's something that, and then that I think opened the door for the Pink Triangle and the things that Mengele might have been doing with patients and cutting their all of the awful things that he was up to. So yeah, definitely it was an attempt to almost erase that part of history and rewrite some stuff.
Now, did religion have a play in this at all too? Because in most cultures, some form of spirituality is the tool to attack the LGBTQ community, or to justify an attack to the community, or justify a marginalization of the community.
I mean, I think it's interesting because as far as
because this all sounds clinical so far.
Yeah, like I think that German fascists were actually quite anti-religion. I mean, they persecuted Catholics. I mean, I think they were okay with Protestant Lutherans and people who were under the umbrella of Protestants, but they really didn't like Catholics if you were Orthodox.
So they were okay with Protestants, Lutherans, and lesbians?
Yeah.
Okay.
More or less.
Right.
And although lesbians also were sent to, they were sent to one major women's camp called Ravensbrück, which is, where is that? It's kind of in the south of Germany somewhere. And that was a women's camp. And lesbians were sent there, but they weren't sent with the pink triangle, like sort of the way that.
Was there a mark for the lesbians?
There wasn't. I think they were mostly categorized under like what's called asozial, which is like just we don't want you in our society. There's something wrong with you. Like it just meant like generic. You are unwanted. And same thing with a lot of trans people. A lot of trans women were considered to be gay men, so they were put under the pink triangle category. But lesbians, it was a little more complicated, I think. But there certainly were lesbians who were put into the camps. They just were put under different criteria, I think. So, yeah.
That's interesting. So this was, we spent some time talking about sort of the pre-Nazi era in Germany, where it sounds like it was trying to be very progressive, trying to be open and accepting to what we now refer to as the LGBT community. But then some things obviously changed during the Nazi uprising. What transitioned then?
It's interesting because there was a special section of the Nazi Party called the SA, the Sturmabteilung, and they were more or less the brown shirts. They were the brute squad. So before the Nazis really came to power, they were the guys in the brown. They were called the brown shirts because of the way their uniforms were, and they would beat up people in the streets. They would pass out leaflets, and they would sort of bully people.
Just the brute force.
Yeah, and the head of the Sturmabteilung was actually this guy named Ernst Röhm, and he was openly gay. And Adolf Hitler was very close friends with him, and so I think he had a hard time probably reconciling the fact that one of his close friends and the head of the SA was openly gay, and that people who were joining the SA knew that that this was an inclination of the SA. So there was a lot of funny business going on in that particular sect of the Nazi party, and there was, I'm sorry, I can't remember the year, I think it was 1934, but I don't want to say that for sure, but there was a event called the Night of the Long Knives, where Hitler said, okay, we've had enough of this. This is making us look bad. And he basically they wiped out, they basically did a purge. It's called the Röhmputsch, actually, like one of the words, like the Röhm purge. So they took out Ernst Röhm because they were just like, we can't have you making us look bad.
Took him out as in assassinated, or took him out as in just removed him from?
They killed him. Yeah.
Let's call it what it is.
Because a lot of the SA that they were targeting were actually in a beer hall in Bavaria at the time, and they basically just went in. If you've ever seen this movie by Luchino Visconti called The Damned, it actually does a really interesting sort of portrayal of it, where they just go in and they basically just it's just debauchery going on in this little beer hall, and like he just kind of takes it out, or the Gestapo sort of just takes all of them out, and they arrested Ernst Röhm and they put him into jail, and they basically, I think, told him like, we're going to give you a pistol, like you can either shoot yourself
or we'll do it for you.
Yeah, and he said, well, you do it for me, and so they did it, and I think that was the one thing where that was finally when Hitler kind of put his foot down and said, we cannot allow this. Like, if we're going to persecute homosexuality in our society, we can't have it going on so openly
in our ranks,
in our own party, like, because everyone knew, and it made them in their opinion, it made them look really bad, and so I think that was the final moment when they were like, like, we have to condemn all of this, and we no tolerance policy, because he was a good friend of Hitler. So I mean, I think it was for someone even as awful as Hitler, it was probably like, wow,
like you said, hard to reconcile with.
Yeah, like, I got to take out my own good friend and for the principles of this party, but he did, and so
Michael, I'm sitting here hearing the good friend statement, and I'm correlating to good friend statements that other political leaders currently make about people who society identifies, on the flip of that, right? Society identifies as bad for society. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. So were there other things during, while the Nazi Party was in power that are strong moments in the history that your display talks about?
Well, we do display what's called the rosa Winkel in German, or the pink triangle, which is the symbol that gay men had, and trans women also were given on their uniforms when they were sent to the concentration camps. And they were sent to two main concentration camps. One was Sachsenhausen, which is about an hour north of Berlin, in the city of Oranienburg. And then another one was called Dachau, which is sort of southern Germany. And those were specifically camps for political dissidents, asozial, so again, people who are just like, we don't really have a category for you, we just don't like you.
Right.
And then communists, and also gay men, and various other people who were considered to be just undesirable.
So they weren't mixed with, just from a historical perspective, I'm curious, were they mixed with any of the Jewish population as well, or were they in and of themselves segregated within the segregation?
As far as I know, yeah, they were kind of kept apart. Like, I would say that the Roma and the Sinti and the Jewish people, like, there was very, I think, stark divide between the where they sent the ethnic minorities that they wanted to persecute and the religious minorities, and then the people who, on account of identity in some way,
classified as deviants at that point.
Yeah, on account of their identity or their political affiliation, who were sent in other directions.
Interesting.
Well, it's interesting because, we talked earlier about who writes history. Yeah. Because history most of the time was written by either the survivors or the winners. And you probably know this by now, that that our community doesn't have a whole lot of history.
Yeah.
Because, in the United States, we were a whole generation of mavens were wiped out by HIV/AIDS.
Yeah.
And has Germany experienced something like some type of event like that other than the Holocaust that closer in modern day that has affected the community and wiped out a generation?
I would say, AIDS definitely affected gay men in Germany to a large extent. Munich and Berlin and the city of Cologne, they had wild scenes, pretty wild nightlife scenes, and they had pretty wild bathhouse scenes, and so kind of in the same vein of San Francisco, London, New York. And so,
other parts of Europe as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they suffered the same because of the spread of AIDS and also and these certain cruising spots and bathhouse scenes having the same issues where it was hard to contain the spread of a virus like that, especially if they didn't know how to contain it at the time.
How it was transmitted even in the beginning.
Yeah. And so it's definitely had a huge impact on Germany as well. And I think that was probably when it's almost incredible to say, but I think that was almost when the sort of movement for queer rights in Germany sort of picked back up again for the first time since the Third Reich sort of quashed it, because when they sort of came back from that period, there's actually, I don't remember where I heard the term from, but there's a term for women who sort of ran Germany, because so many men were either in POW camps, or they were dead, or they were just missing.
Or fighting the war, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and they were called the Trümmerfrauen, or the women of the rubble, and they sort of took over businesses, and they were becoming heads of households because there were no men in the town or in the
Sure.
the country left to really do it for that period. And I heard I wish I knew from where I heard this, but somebody used the term Trümmerlesben, like the lesbians of the rubble, because they were kind of the only, like, they flew under the radar a little bit, so they were the only ones sort of left in the gay scene after World War II.
Right.
And so there was a very thriving lesbian scene, in Berlin especially, but also in all the major cities, I think. And throughout the 60s, and it took a long time, I think, for the sort of the community to rebuild itself. And then, when they finally did, and I think that really took until the 70s, and then early 80s, especially with the AIDS crisis, for them to look to Stonewall,
right?
Because that was now their pattern. Like, right. What happened at Stonewall, and how can we move forward? Which is why Pride parades still in Germany are called Christopher Street Day parades, because they harken back to that.
All the way back
to the Christopher. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so
and it's strangely interesting to see the corollaries. I mean, you're talking about how women, took over seats of power essentially, in the cultural divide, and that there might have been, maybe an upsurge of lesbian freedom, if you will, back then. And, of course, here in the U.S. we have, the image of Rosie the Riveter and,
right.
And everything else that happened in that same, historical context or same historical timeline. Just interesting to see how the two evolved. Did you have something? Oh, okay. Yeah. So, again, just for our listeners, can you go ahead and just tell everybody before we go on our bottom of the hour break where your exhibit is and what it is, and we'll come back and talk more.
Yeah, so we are the Goethe-Institut Washington. We are the German Cultural Center here in Washington, D.C. And, we have a project this summer called Queer as German Folk, celebrating 50 years of transatlantic rainbow friendship. And our exhibition is here at 1990 K Street Northwest, Suite 03, which is where the Goethe-Institut is. And we also have another part of the exhibition at the D.C. Center for the LGBT community, and that's at the Reeves Municipal Building, sort of near, 13th Street and, R and S. And I wish I remembered, but they're in that area.
It's good enough. You're not from here. We'll give you that. All right.
I'm from Maryland. I don't know. This whole thing is
terrific. Well, we'll be back, folks. You are listening to all day programming for LGBT radio here at WPFW 89.3 on your FM dial. We also stream live, and you're listening to members of the LGBT collective, Inside Out Radio Collective, and we're here hosting a remarkable day of programming in honor of Pride and everything LGBT. All right, welcome back. We are here for all day programming with WPFW 89.3 FM, all day LGBT programming in honor of Pride, Stonewall, and all of the LGBT history. I'm one of your hosts, Ed Stern. I'm here with Michael Sharp, another one of our hosts. We are from the Inside Out Collective that normally airs at 2 a.m. on Tuesdays, and we've kind of taken over the airways all day. We started at 8, and we're going through midnight with tons of information, education, and entertainment about the LGBT community. We are here with Raleigh. We were finishing a conversation. Raleigh, just for the second half, go ahead and reintroduce yourself to the community, and we're going to keep talking a little bit about your project.
Okay. My name is Raleigh Joyner. I'm the program coordinator at the Goethe-Institut Washington, which is the German Cultural Center, and the language school for German in Washington, D.C., And currently this summer we have an exhibition and an ongoing project called Queer as German Folk, celebrating 50 years of transatlantic rainbow friendship. So the 50 years being the 50 years in Stonewall.
Now, Raleigh, we have a caller on the line.
Oh, okay.
Hello, caller. You are on WPFW. Do you have a question or a comment?
A little of both. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
Well, your caller talking about the era wherein those types of things were never discussed. They were looked at in taboo, especially, I suppose, Berlin in the 20s was a raucous place, but post-war Berlin was, one could presuppose the movie, and I'm sure you remember Cabaret. So,
of course.
I can't remember the actor's name there, but his, well-made-up face and the falsetto voice and the whole bit kind of dredged up images of that era. And so I just wondered if it never was a time when, suppose, the gay life was not what one might consider a subculture of normal, whatever that is, life in the rest of the world. So it's not a society or a country, even where it may have been decried or denigrated as a choice, that it's actually seems to be that it's a part of mankind. It's not a choice that one would actually make, So, anyway, her commentary just dredged up Cabaret for me for some reason. I don't know. That was set in Berlin,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. I think Raleigh, he made a very good point. Raleigh's just a touch younger than than the Cabaret time period, but I think it's, right. What fascinates me about the way you started your conversation was, in essence, Germany was normalizing what most of society is trying to normalize now. I'm curious, of course, none of us in the room could answer it, but it's like you wonder what would have happened if the Nazis hadn't done what they did in so many ways, historically speaking. But this is just another one. Like, how would the LGBT community of Germany been different as a result? Yeah,
and also, the caller, he was right. Cabaret with Liza Minnelli, and that was inspired. That was based on a series of writings by a British writer named Christopher Isherwood, who openly said that he moved to Berlin from much more repressed England in the late 20s, early 30s, because he specifically wanted to get into the scene of just like the scene of basically just hustlers and free love. And he ended up in the cabaret scene, and he made friends with, the Liza Minnelli in real life was a woman named Jean Ross, who was a kind of struggling singer. And this was a scene that attracted, W.H. Auden, the poet, he was also there. And a lot of people came there because they found it to be sort of a haven for this sort of artistic and queer in subculture. And like I said, with like the Nazi brute squad, like they were always there. They were always standing on street corners. As soon as the war ended in I can't think of my dates right now, 1819. Well, as soon as the war ended, they were on street corners passing out leaflets. People were like, oh, these guys are jabronis. Like, we don't want anything to do with these guys. And then the next thing you know, they're beating people up. And so they were always a threat. Yeah. And definitely, but the idea of the cabaret, being sort of a safe spot for people to express who they were was certainly a thing. And in fact, on Saturday, we had sort of a celebration of that. We had a little cabaret here downstairs.
At the gallery?
Yeah.
Oh.
And we called it Cabaret on K because you would not probably expect a cabaret to be on K Street Northwest.
But if it was going to be anywhere, K would be it.
Yeah. That's right. It's a Goethe Institute. And so we brought, and it was supposed to be a celebration of, Germany in the 1920s and D.C., Baltimore nightlife today, and just sort of, what do we see here now? And what
clearly we're on the wrong mailing list, Michael.
Because we're about to go back into the 20s, and it's like, well, what are we going to have now? Like, what's it going to be like now? And so...
well, you bring up an interesting point about going back. Now, is Germany seeing some of the same slides backwards with civil rights and human rights that the United States is seeing? Because for a while, it seemed like Germany wasn't having many problems with the LGBTQ community. And now that's seeming to change a little bit.
Yeah, it is interesting because, one of the major parties of Germany is the CDU, the Christliche Demokratische Union, or the Christian Democratic Party. And they actually are quite conservative. Their conservative is like our, still probably somewhere left on the spectrum in the United States. But they nonetheless were not really too supportive of same-sex marriage, for instance. And so same-sex marriage was only legalized in Germany last year.
Wow.
But there are populist parties in Germany that are giving a hard time, especially with immigration. And because immigration is the big issue. That, what I would say, is the big thing going on in Germany that's sort of trying to pull things back, because there were huge influxes of immigrants in Germany after the war. You had what they called Gastarbeiter, people who were brought in from southern European countries and Turkey to sort of rebuild the country. And then in the 70s, a lot of people from Turkey and northern Africa that came in to help rebuild the country, or to help create jobs. And they stayed. They didn't go back. Then you had, in 2015, you had a huge amount of people coming in from Syria. And you still have people coming in from that area. You have a lot of populist parties that are trying to give those people a hard time. And so I would say with the LGBT community, they're on those people's list too.
Right.
But their primary concern right now, I would say, is probably fighting against immigration, fighting against refugee influx.
Raleigh, one of the things that we wanted to learn about is, queer as German folk, sort of what was the inception? Where did all of where'd the idea come from to do this multi-state, multinational project?
Yeah, so we're kind of, the Goethe-Institut is kind of broken up into regions. And so we are the North America region. So that includes Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, all of the institutes in the United States, including Washington, New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, and Atlanta. I hope I got them all. And then you have Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Havana. So that's all of us.
That's great.
And so we are the regional institute, and New York brought this idea to us, and it was a collaboration with the Schwules Museum, or the Queer Museum in Berlin.
Now, we have 2 callers on the line.
Okay.
So, hello, caller. Can you tell us your name? And you're on the air. What is your question or your comment?
I'm back again. It's RG. I wasn't able to complete my thought.
Oh, RG.
Do you have a position available for a black burgermeister? I'm just joking with that. I don't even know if you got the joke, but at any rate,
yes.
I have my leathers and my build hat, leather vest and the whole bit. But nevertheless, all that said, I'm not really saying anything derogatory about this at all. There is nothing derogatory. It's just such a cultural, the movie Cabaret was so delightful that that era should be featured in the, let's say, Deutsches Museum as a part of German culture. And also my question to you all is, what is the racial climate in Germany of late? Can they actually say that they have arrived with civil rights beyond the United States with their acceptance of people of color?
I don't know. I don't know if Raleigh might have that answer, but we can certainly ask. Raleigh.
Well, they definitely have a racial issue in Germany. They have for quite a long time. The main tensions that you will see in Germany are between people who consider themselves ethnic or native Germans and people who are from Turkey or the Middle East. And so there's a lot of questions about quote-unquote assimilation into German society, and especially when it comes to religion, because, of course, this population is majority Muslim. So there's a giant issue going on right now that I think will always be going on in terms of do people who come to Germany, even if they came all the way back in the 50s or the 70s, do they count as German? And of course they count as German, but I think a lot of people want to challenge that a lot. They want to talk about the idea of assimilation and whether or not these people really belong in German society. And that question or that conversation continues as we have a refugee influx that continues to come into pretty much all of the European Union. But there are also black Germans for many reasons. The American military has continued to have a large presence in Germany. And so there's always been a question of identity of, for instance, the children of black American soldiers and German women, who are, like, what do they count as? And there's been a movement, a sort of social movement and also an artistic movement of Afro-Deutsch or Afro-German to sort of give those people a voice and an identity. So they're working on it.
That's great. Thanks, RG. We have a second caller. Can we go ahead with that other caller if we still have him on the line, Mike?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Yes. Hello, what's your name?
Hi, this is Bianca.
Hey, Bianca.
Hi, everybody. First and foremost, thank you, Michael and Ed. I've been kind of listening on and off throughout the day. So really a lot of information, and it's very educational, even for me as well. So it's really nice to see that WPFW is actually creating the space for us. So having said all of that, I do have a question for Riley. I appreciate the exhibit that your organization is doing in terms of the history of the LGBTQ movement in Germany and here in the U.S. and the support and the partnership that's happening. But I'm curious if you can share a little bit as to what's next. What's in the future for the queer community both in Germany and in the U.S. and the partnership and the collaboration between two countries. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Great question, Bianca.
Yeah. I think a major part of that is where our local curator came in. So basically about 75% of the exhibition was curated by Birgit Bosold and Karina Klugbauer from the Schwules Museum Berlin, which literally means Queer Museum Berlin. And they curated it from a 2015 exhibition called Homosexualitäten, which translates roughly to homosexualities. And so they curated it for all of the North American Goethe centers and Goethe Institutes. And then they basically told us, everybody pick a curator from their local city and have them put together a part of the exhibition that is specific to your city. So we found a really wonderful curator named Mary Claire Phillips. She's a really great queer historian and an archivist and curator. And
from America?
Yeah, she's based here in D.C. And her work actually focuses primarily on LGBT women in military service, especially in the past, during the 1940s. And so she really did an amazing job of making it not only cover a lot of ground when it comes to what DC's queer community is, but she also made it so that it wasn't just you walk into the exhibition and you just go, okay, I'm done. I'm walking out now. Great, thanks, I'm finished. It was more in the sense that, for instance, she collaborated with a lot of local organizations like Transatlantic, and they have currently there is a trans woman from, I forget the country that she's originally from, but she's from Central America, and she's been detained without any kind of indication of her trial date or anything like that. She's been detained indefinitely, and they are trying to push for her to be freed. And so that's one thing that they that Mary Claire and Transatlantic decided to feature on our wall, and they actually put up a little script for you to take and call your congressman or woman with, and you basically just read the script, and it's supposed to sort of let them know, like, we're watching you, like, we are thinking about this woman who's being detained unfairly, and so it gives you something to really take away and do something about this issue with. And
personalizes
also,
it.
Yeah, and another project, Check It, which is involves a lot, Check It DC. They work a lot with gentrification and moving, especially queer communities of color, out of where they originally have sort of set up. Also they feature in her part of the exhibition, she featured a lot of spaces that, because of gentrification, were shut down or had to move or have just disappeared altogether. And a lot of it involves little QR codes that you can sort of snap, and you can take a walking tour of where these places used to be, and it's very interesting to see what's there now. So there's a lot of things that she was able to put into this very small part of the exhibit, but it's so dynamic, and I think that that's what's great about it, because you do have a sense of, well, what now? And then she really made she really did a great job at adding these things that made you feel like you could walk away and do something. You could call your congressperson, or you could go on a walking tour and see what DC used to look like before.
So it's a multi-sensory kind of experience. Yeah,
and so that was. I think that was one thing that I really found great when I saw what she had done.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing, Riley. I think those are really great and amazing things that, can kind of continue the movement for the queer community and the story and what the future is going to look like. And I personally appreciate all the technology aspect that comes with it, because when we're thinking of our communities also diverse, from generation, culture, backgrounds, and stuff like that. So I think everybody can definitely relate and can tap into it. And then just for curiosity, really looking at like what DC used to look like then, and what it looks like now, and then what it's going to look like in the future. So thank you for that. And thank you, Michael and Ed, again for an amazing show.
Thank you, Bianca. Thank you. We miss you, and can't wait to see you again. For those of you that don't know, Bianca is one of our hosts of the Inside Out LGBT Collective, and we're just thrilled to have you as part of the collective. Thanks.
I'm super excited, and I'm glad to be part of the family.
And that we are, absolutely. All right, Raleigh, we're getting ready to wrap up here. We've got about a little bit of a minute left. Is there anything else that you wanted to share quickly with us?
Sure, yeah. So basically, we're sort of coming to an end because it's... Our project is sort of coming to an end because it's, coming to August, and everybody just gets out of the city, and then everything ends.
It's just hot and sticky, and nobody wants to do anything in DC.
It's swampy and stinky. So we're just going to go ahead. But
that's not good for tourism board, by the way.
Yeah. No. And so, but the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to screen from a German filmmaker named Rosa von Braunheim. We're going to screen the AIDS trilogy, which is 3 films that he made about the AIDS crisis, 2 about New York and 1 about Berlin. If you go to goethe.de/DC and you click on our events
Can
link,
you spell that for us Americans?
Yes, GOETHE.de, which is the German ending for a website, /DC or /Washington. You can click on our events calendar, and you'll find when we're screening those films.
That's phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming in this hour. I appreciate the information and educating all of us on some of the similarities and your exhibit. It's been a pleasure meeting you. You're listening to WPFW 89.3 FM, and this is all day LGBT programming in honor of Pride, and we're happy to be here.